From a defabricated garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, another madcap adventure with avian flu spread by wild turkey. And now, the podcast host whose faithful dog companion knows full well to steer clear from those meddling turkeys, Pete Dominic!
Yes, that is true, Pete Co. Of course, referring to the video I shared yesterday on Twitter when I walked out of the shed yesterday afternoon after interviewing Senator Mallory McMorrow, who is on today's show. Very excited to share that with you. I walk out there, and there's a giant turkey, a wild turkey, in my fenced-in yard. You're going to have to go to my Twitter feed to see it, but I tried to get Indy, the dog, to chase it. And she did for a second, and then the turkey chased her, and it got pretty crazy. It got pretty crazy, folks, so I highly recommend you go watch that. Wild stuff. The other day I walked out, and there was a deer with the turkey like it was some kind of Disney film. Bizarre stuff, but happy to see them getting along so well. Okay, well, as I mentioned, Senator Mallory McMorrow joins me today. We had an amazing conversation. She's an amazing, inspiring state senator from Michigan who's, I'm sure you've seen her speeches going viral, super powerful, very, very effective politician, progressive politician in Michigan. And we had a great conversation. And also, very special guest, a deep dive, a profile, a listener profile of the great Pete Co., who you just heard start the show. You've heard start the show and do the news dump jingles for over a year now, maybe almost 2 years. Pete and I have gotten to know each other really well. I love to do these profiles on listeners, subscribers, and in Pete's case, he's also a pretty big contributor to the show. And I learned a lot about him. I think you're going to really like it. I think it's going to make folks feel good with these profiles whenever I do them. I think it gives everybody a perspective on life and makes you feel less alone with your own shit. And Pete Co. did just a great job. We had a lot of laughs. I think you're going to love it. I know you are. Senator Mallory McMorrow and Pete Co. both joining me today here on a Wednesday in the middle of June. Did you see the strawberry moon? Did you? Hopefully you caught that. Beautiful last night. And apparently cryptocurrency is not a thing. Congresswoman Lauren Boebert was a prostitute that might have had a couple of abortions, although I'd like to see the corroborating sourcing before we get too carried away with that. Didn't stop. Listener Kim Nyborg in Iowa tweeting at KVO Nyborg tweets, I have no issue with sex work or abortions, and I'm not here to shame anyone for that, but I will shame holier than fuck hypocrisy. Hashtag bye-bye, Bobo. Love it, Kim. All right, so cryptocurrency is tanking. Lauren Boebert was a prostitute. And apparently Tim Allen is a bastard. I didn't realize that. Remind me why I'm happy I'm not doing the big comprehensive news segment at the top of the show here. So let me get to my guests. That's why you're here anyway. First, Senator Mallory McMorrow. She is Michigan State Senator representing the 13th district there. Super fascinating. I'm going to say young woman. She's only 35 years old. I say young for a politician like that. Representing the areas that represent Birmingham, Bloomfield Hills, right outside Detroit there in Michigan, Rochester Hills, Royal Oak, beautiful area. And you probably saw some of her speeches going viral, including when back in April, a Republican state senator named Lana Teese sent a fundraising email accusing Senator McMorrow of being a, quote, groomer who sexualized children. Well, Senator McMorrow wasn't taking that sitting down, and she addressed the accusation in a speech that has now gone viral on the floor of the Michigan Senate. She's had other speeches going viral now since. She has almost 250,000 followers on Twitter. She's going to do big things, and I'm super psyched that she sat down with me. And I hope that, not to brag, but you can recognize that that's the value of the show, that I can get these high-profile, influential, news-making, inspiring, awesome people on the show every day of the week. So please subscribe for as little as $5 if you haven't already. StandUpWithPete.com, truly independent media from my solar-powered shed in Rockland County, New York, as Pete Co. said, joining you every day along this journey of life. And I'm super happy to have you along with us. All right, so here is first the almost 4 minute, I think it's about 4 minutes, Senator McMorrow's floor speech that went viral. She has since given important comments on gun violence that have gone viral as well. But first, I just want to play this for you before I get to my conversation with you to remind you who she is, what she said, and why her standing up is so important.
I didn't expect to wake up yesterday to the news that the senator from the 22nd district had overnight accused me by name of grooming and sexualizing children in an email fundraising for herself. So I sat on it for a while wondering why me. And then I realized, because I am the biggest threat to your hollow, hateful scheme. Because you can't claim that you are targeting marginalized kids in the name of, quote, parental rights if another parent is standing up to say no. So then what? Then you dehumanize and marginalize me. You say that I'm one of them. You say she's a groomer. She supports pedophilia. She wants children to believe that they were responsible for slavery and to feel bad about themselves because they're white. Well, here's a little bit of background about who I really am. Growing up, my family was very active in our church. I sang in the choir. My mom taught CCD. One day, our priest called a meeting with my mom and told her that she was not living up to the church's expectations and that she was disappointing. My mom asked why. Among other reasons, she was told it was because she was divorced and because the priest didn't see her at Mass every Sunday. So where was my mom on Sundays? She was at the soup kitchen with me. My mom taught me at a very young age that Christianity and faith was about being part of a community, about recognizing our privilege and blessings and doing what we can to be of service to others, especially people who are marginalized, targeted, and who had less, often unfairly. I learned that service was far more important than performative nonsense like being seen in the same pew every Sunday or writing Christian in your Twitter bio and using that as a shield to target and marginalize already marginalized people. I also stand on the shoulders of people like Father Ted Hesburgh, the longtime president of the University of Notre Dame, who was active in the civil rights movement, who recognized his power and privilege as a white man, a faith leader, and the head of an influential and well-respected institution, and who saw black people in this country being targeted and discriminated against and beaten, and reached out to lock arms with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he was alive, when it was unpopular and risky, and marching alongside them to say, "We've got you," to offer protection and service and allyship to try to right the wrongs and fix injustice in the world. So who am I? I am a straight, white, Christian, married, suburban mom who knows that the very notion that learning about slavery or redlining or systemic racism somehow means that children are being taught to feel bad or hate themselves because they are white is absolute nonsense. No child alive today is responsible for slavery. No one in this room is responsible for slavery. But each and every single one of us bears responsibility for writing the next chapter of history. Each and every single one of us decides what happens next and how we respond to history and the world around us. We are not responsible for the past. We also cannot change the past. We can't pretend that it didn't happen or deny people their very right to exist. I am a straight, white, Christian, married, suburban mom. I want my daughter to know that she is loved, supported, and seen for whoever she becomes. I want her to be curious, empathetic, and kind. People who are different are not the reason that our roads are in bad shape after decades of disinvestment, or that healthcare costs are too high, or that teachers are leaving the profession. I want every child in this state to feel seen, heard, and supported, not marginalized and targeted because they are not straight, white, and Christian. We cannot let hateful people tell you otherwise, to scapegoat and deflect from the fact that they are not doing anything to fix the real issues that impact people's lives. And I know that hate will only win if people like me stand by and let it happen. So I want to be very clear right now. Call me whatever you want. I hope you brought in a few dollars. I hope it made you sleep good last night. I know who I am. I know what faith and service means and what it calls for in this moment. We will not let hate win.
Ladies and gentlemen, for the second time on Stand Up, Senator Mallory McMorrow. Welcome back. Thank you.
Glad to be back.
So lots to talk with you about. You've been working your tail off in the most inspiring of ways that I think a politician or public servant can. But just to quickly ask you about that speech, which I told you I just played, what has been the reaction? Because I feel like what you've heard a lot, and I think this is important, is that you've woken a lot of people up and you've kind of given them the strength. What have people said? Don't be modest.
It has been overwhelming in the best way possible. So my staff and I mean, our team is really small. We've taken a lot over the past few years with COVID and the big lie and getting emails from all around the country from people who say that Mike Lindell is right and the election was stolen. You have to do something about it. It's been really demoralizing, but we expected negative feedback once we saw the speech starting to do numbers, and we just haven't seen it. We have gotten feedback from all over the state, all over the country, people from all over the world tuning in to my weekly live stream now. And
wow.
I have a PO box that I check almost every couple of days. And it's been packed to the gills with people writing their life story. And it's Republicans, Democrats, people who are religious, people who are not religious, people who say, like, consider me your sweet old grandma in Texas, like, you go, girl.
Wow.
But I got one letter from a guy who really wrote out his life story. He said, you know, I'm a gay man and I remember these attacks in the 70s and how visceral they were. And he's like, at this point in my life, I am taking care of a lot of sick family members and I've dedicated my life to other people. And he said he never expected that we would get back to a place where these attacks are out in the open again.
Yeah.
But he said he's glad he lived long enough to have heard my speech. And if, you know, I just happened to be in a room where I was chopping a lot of onions. And it's been, I know it's renewed all of our spirits. And this is why we do this. I mean, it touched a nerve in the best way possible.
Yeah, it certainly affected me personally. I told you some of the stuff that had happened to me as being involved with the campaign, being outspoken, and to see you standing there. So often Democrats, progressives get criticized for not fighting back, but that's clearly what you're doing. Did anybody send anything weird? Like I don't know, like a jar of jelly? And I don't mean hopefully nothing dangerous or anything, but like something they made. A lot of people like to, you know.
There's like T-shirts now that have like my face on them, which is very strange. And there were like all of these like artists on Instagram. So I was wearing a headband that day that I gave the speech. And first of all, Laura Ingraham on Fox News called me liberal Karen with a headband. So that's how you know we made it.
Yes,
but all these artists like started drawing, like the headband itself has turned into a thing.
Oh, wow.
And I will be honest, I lost a lot of my hair when I had a kid. So I'm like self-conscious about it, which is why it was there. But apparently people are like really latching onto that as being a thing. So there's merch now, which is strange. A lot of people are sending me books, sometimes without notes. So if you want to send me a book, awesome. But like, please send a note with it so I know who it came from.
Well, that's amazing. It's so amazing. And you're doing, you know, you're going to just continue to do this and generate this a massive following now on social media. Like you said, people watching your videos that you, I think, tailor-made specifically for your constituents in your district in Michigan, and now people are watching them in Taiwan or something. Who knows? But it's a wonderful thing, and just to see even like the merch thing, like whatever it takes to fundraise. By the way, and I'm sure you're going to do some socially responsible stuff like that to capitalize on it. But more importantly, you kept saying in that speech, "I'm a straight white Christian woman," and why? Why did you make that the refrain?
So, you know, I wanted to be very clear, and I called my friend Jeremy Moss, who's one of my colleagues. He's our only openly gay sitting senator. And, you know, I recognize that this attack wasn't actually about me. It felt like a warning shot that, like, if you're going to stand up with minority groups or the LGBTQ community, you know, you can't be one of us, you're one of them. And I looked at what happened in Virginia, and Glenn Youngkin got elected by tapping into, frankly, white suburban moms who have every frustration, and rightfully so, in the wake of the past 2 years with COVID and school closures. And, you know, we don't have childcare policies in this country that are actually supportive, but it tapped into those frustrations and it's now using them to target other people. So these are like these Moms for Liberty groups that are being formed. And I had a long conversation with a woman in my district who, she's a mom in a school district, and she called me and she said that she joined a parent group because she's frustrated and she doesn't think that there's enough communication coming out of her school district. But she said to me, she's concerned because now this group is going after CRT and the diversity and equity and inclusion director. And she said to me, she's like, I'm not that person, but I also don't feel like I have anywhere else to go.
Right.
So really, like, my speech was tailored to her because we can't constantly expect that, Black residents continue to stand up for themselves when another Black man gets murdered by police. We can't continually expect gay kids to stand up and say, I just exist and I want you to leave me alone, because it only wins if the majority group stands up and says, no, what you're doing is bullshit and we're not going to stand for it. So a lot of it was like, I am talking to people who look like me, who are not targeted, who are not marginalized, to say, just because you're okay doesn't mean that this shit is okay. Right. And it's time to get off the sidelines and suit up and hop in the minivan and like, let's go help everybody. It's our job.
Yeah. Mallory McMorrow doesn't need to tell gay people or brown, Black people about their struggle. She needs to tell people like herself about how to think about it differently. And, same with men, with white men. I mean, that's the work that we have to do in anti-racism, as well as, I would say, for men, anti-sexism. It's like, I got to go tell my buddies, dude, tone it down. You're objectifying. You're objectifying.
And that has been, some of the criticism that I've gotten is, from people who are either who are secular, non-religious or members of the gay community or Black women who have said, like, it sounds like you're only talking to white women when we're in this fight forever. And I'm like, no, I know that. That's the problem, is you have been in this fight for much longer. And frankly, like, I need to talk to people who look like me to say the reality is we're late. We're late, but we're not too late. And there's a fine window right now, especially watching what, Republicans around the country are trying to do to voting rights and democracy, and watching, the January 6th hearings play out, that I'm talking to people who look like me. And it is on us to finally step up and join everybody else who's been in this fight for a lot longer than we have, and not just sit back and think to ourselves, well, this isn't really about me. It's not my problem, so I'm not going to do anything about it.
So just one question about your own personal journey. I think that where is the quote that kind of went viral? Well, that entire quote went viral, but the part about, the story about your mom bringing you being scolded for not being at the church. Instead, you were actually doing work at a soup kitchen to make less fortunate people's lives a little better because you could. And my question, though, is about your journey when it comes to LGBT rights. I mean, you're, I think, significantly younger than me. I'm 46. But the point is, you're a straight person, and yet you have this awareness and sensitivity and empathy. And obviously, you're advocating for LGBT rights. You were just this past weekend at the Detroit Pride Fest in Michigan. How was that? Gay events are very, very fun.
It is so fun. There were so many people. Attorney General Dana Nessel, she's an openly gay, our Attorney General. She's a badass who fought for marriage equality in the state. So she and I were riding on the top of a truck with Hooper, the Detroit Pistons mascot. And it was just, one benefit if you stand up is you get invited to celebrate with people who are like just so thrilled to be out and be able to be who they are. And it was so much fun.
Is it true that it was a hot day and Hooper the mascot almost died on that float?
It was actually not bad. Hooper's fine. I found out
I'm looking up Hooper. Yeah, it is
not allowed to speak to us.
It is. I wasn't sure. I had to look it up. It is one of those. It's like a piston. It's a horse. It's got a head on it.
It's a horse.
It was clearly hot. Whoever Hooper was, you're a real trooper.
And a great balance. It made me nervous. It's like standing on top of a box truck. And granted, we're going like 2 miles an hour, but I was like, oh, Hooper.
So at what point in your life were you young? Did you become aware of kind of sexual orientation? Were there people in your family in your life and become at some point an advocate as well?
Yeah. So, part of my story in the speech, and I've said it elsewhere, is I learned a lot of who I am from my mom. And my mom, she was a single mom. She was divorced. And she always had this kind of like open door attitude in my house where like I never had a key to my house. Our doors were always unlocked, which is probably not the safest thing in the world. But I would come home from school every day and it's like any random neighbor or person would just be in my kitchen, like eating cookies and hanging out and having snacks. And it didn't matter who you were and what your background was. And at one point, a lesbian couple moved in next door to us, and it was just very normal. You know, it got to the point where my mom, and I think she meant well, but this is just, you know, it came from a very good place. We had been living next to this couple for some time, and she sat me down and she's like, you know, Mallory, you're not making the best dating choices when it comes to men. So if you want to be a lesbian, that's okay by me. And I was like, Mom, that's very sweet. That is not how it works. But, you know, my mom was just trying to look out for me. And that was very nice. But, you know,
I'm far worse than your mother. I've done every typical thing I can to make both my daughters gay. And apparently it's not working with how many boys.
It's not a thing you can change, despite what the current Republican Party wants you to believe.
Important point. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so that experience, I think, kind of informs probably the beginning, at least for you, just being exposed.
Yeah, well, and then I just remember, you know, when the marriage equality decision finally came down, and it's just the common, if you care about other people, you sense that it's not fair that I have a right that somebody else doesn't, just because of who they are. And, you know, I want my friends to be happy and not be discriminated against. Yeah. And, you know, my life is much richer because I know people who are very different than me and have different life experiences. And, you know, it's not that hard to not hate other people. It takes a lot of energy to hate people.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. Well, it's great that the LGBT community there and around the country has an advocate like you fighting. Two more quick questions, one of which is about the gun violence issue, of course, which you know far too intimately about because of the shooting in Oxford, which is either right in your district, I think we talked about it last time, adjacent to. Obviously, you've met some of those victims' families. You know about the issue from a policy standpoint. What's going on in the Michigan State House where you are not allowed to give your floor speech? So you gave it on YouTube, and about 5 billion more people saw it than might have seen it had they allowed you to give it in the State House, although it would have been more maybe legislatively important. What's going on there? What happened?
Yeah, so we have introduced dozens of bills, you know, not even in the wake of Oxford, that we formed the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus in 2016. So even before I came into office, my predecessors formed it. And it's been dozens of bills year after year after year to try to address the issue of gun violence. And then Oxford happened, and we had kids from Oxford who came to their state capital. And there's one 15-year-old girl who I asked her how she was doing, and she said, terrible. You know, I asked, how is it going back to school? And she said, I can't go. I can't be in the building. It's too painful. I've gone back to virtual school because it's just too much anxiety. And somebody who's too anxious to go to school, came to her state capital anyway to try to make sure that what happened to her never happens to any other kid. And I had colleagues who wouldn't even listen to her. So after Uvalde, we were so upset because this had just happened here in Michigan 6 months ago. It happened in Uvalde. You know, these parents, these teachers are going through the same thing that too many people have gone through. So we tried a procedural move to pull one of our bills, our safe storage legislation, which would require that firearms owners safely secure their weapons so that they don't get into the hands of minors or people who shouldn't have them, which could have prevented the Oxford High School shooting from happening. This was a 15-year-old who got his parents' gun and killed 4 of his classmates. And our Republican majority rejected the bill, refused to vote on it, sent it back to committee. But then for the next few days, because they control the legislature here, typically we're allowed 5 minutes during statements, the period of Senate where we can kind of speak on whatever it is we want to speak about. And they ended session early 2 days in a row because not only did they not want to do anything about gun violence, but they didn't want to hear about it. They didn't want to be lectured about, you know, how they weren't doing their jobs. And I sat in a committee after the second day, and I just, you know, I was visibly upset. And I had just talked to a friend of mine as a teacher at Oxford who lives in my district, and we talk really regularly. And she felt so helpless after Uvalde, and I was visibly upset that day. And one of the Republicans just laughed and snickered at me. And it felt like, oh, we finally got you. You know, you can't give a speech. And like, you don't want to do anything about it. And now you want to silence anybody who does. Like, that's where we're at in Michigan right now. And it's disgusting.
politically, you just can't get these policies passed through the state the way we just did in New York. Even though the governor there, obviously, you have a great relationship with Democrat Gretchen Whitmer, would sign them. You don't have the votes.
No, the Republicans control both the House and the Senate in Michigan, and they've controlled the Senate since 1984. So, it is just obstruction. So the governor can do her best by, frankly, stopping bad policies from becoming law. We have a backstop with the governor, but we can't proactively do any of the things that we would want to do that our constituents voted for us to end gun violence or to protect water or to protect reproductive rights. None of these things we can proactively do in the state right now. You
see in the U.S. Senate, apparently Chris Murphy and John Cornyn have gotten together. Republicans and Democrats, 10 each side. It's not Democrats to the issue, obviously Republicans on guns. What's your relationship like with the Republicans in the state Senate there? Do they argue even in good faith? Is there any way for you to come together on something like the U.S. Senate did? I mean, it'll be national law, I guess, but uniformity is what matters on the policy. But on red flags or backgrounds or anything, I mean, what is your, when you go talk to them, these people that snicker at you and lie about you and say that you're the worst thing, a pedophile and all of that, can you talk to them? Even much less get
No, I mean, so this version of the Republican Party in the state has been so taken over by the right flank and just obstructionism. This is the question that we as Democrats get all the time. After my colleague attacked me and accused me of pedophilia and grooming, somebody asked me, "Are you going to be able to work with her again?" And I said, "No." She's a mother. She accused another mother of basically molesting children. And the question to me is, what are you going to do to work with her again? And I wasn't this way when I came into office 4 years ago, but I fundamentally believe the only way we get back to some sense of normal is if we flip one of the chambers here and it forces, the Michigan Republican Party to reconsider its strategy, because its strategy right now is obstruct everything, have too friendly of a relationship with militia groups and hate groups and extremist groups and just, throw out whatever lie you can. It feels like a competition to see who can say the worst, most hateful thing. And they're doing it because it's winning. So, the only way that it stops is if it stops being a winning strategy. And then maybe we can get back to a place where, I would love to be able to work across the aisle with moderate Republicans and debate tax policy and get to a place where, something like red flag laws, which is one of my bills, would actually pass, because we've had conversations with Republicans who have been interested in the past. I had a town hall in my district about red flag legislation, and we had an NRA member, a police officer, an emergency room physician, a woman who lost her brother to suicide with a gun who was a veteran. And I made sure to keep all of us elected officials out of it and just let, kind of experts, including David Chipman, who's a 20-year ATF agent who was Biden's nominee to head the ATF. He's from Rochester Hills, Michigan, to talk about it openly. And we had one Republican House member who kind of came in disguise. She was great to sort of listen. She was like, "I'm not there yet, but I wanted to hear it out." And that was really encouraging to me.
Is it true she had Groucho Marx glasses and mustache?
No, she just came, it was like in sweats, and it's not her district. So people wouldn't have known who she was anyway. And I was really encouraged by that. And she unfortunately passed away this past year from cancer. And I was just like,
that just made my joke a billion times worse, by the way. But it illustrates the point that you're making. Is that panel available for people to view somewhere? That'd be interesting.
Yeah, I have it. I'll send it to you.
Get a link. Well, listen, I know I got to let you go. And it's clear, by the way, the point that you're making about how extremism is winning, that you can't talk across the aisle, is that the guy that's the leading Republican in the gubernatorial race, where your primary, I guess, is in August, just got arrested by the FBI for being part of...
Okay, so let me lay it. So there were 10 people running on the Republican side for governor in Michigan. 5 of them got kicked off the ballot because they all collected fraudulent signatures.
Oh, my God.
The ones who complain about election fraud did actual election fraud. And then they tried to argue that it was the firm they hired that did it, so it wasn't their fault, which, the party of personal responsibility was taking no personal. So there were 5 left, and one of the 5 just got pulled in by the FBI for being an insurrectionist. And now the debate in Michigan, is this going to help him win the nomination?
Well, Steve Bannon immediately brings him on his show. And I think I learned that from your Twitter feed. And yes, it's going now being arrested by the FBI is a good thing in Republican primaries, I guess. It makes you.
Yeah. Well, that's my argument now. You know, I represent currently a moderate district. And my argument when I talk about Republicans, I'm not talking about my constituents, right? I am talking about this version of the party.
Sure.
So the choice this year is, do you want the government to work or do you want people who want to blow it up? That's it. Like, that's the choice.
And that's the kind of simplistic binary that you have to use to communicate with people. And the kind of way that you are communicating is a model for national Democrats and the progressive movement, especially because of the kind of district that you're representing. So, I mean, you know, I'd ask you what your secret sauce is, but just keep doing what you're doing. And we'll keep, you know, talking to you and following you and being inspired by you and your team. Congratulations. Keep up the good work. You are a constant inspiration around the country. Thank you for talking to me again.
Thanks, Pete.
All right, there she goes, everybody. Senator Mallory McMorrow. It would be a really big deal if you tweeted her and her team. Let them know we've got so many people listening that care, that want to stand up and support her and her work. At Mallory McMorrow is her Twitter handle, by the way. Please go tweet her. I'm sure she'll see it, maybe even respond to you and show her some support, maybe donate some cash. You want someone as influential and effective. People always complaining about Democrats not being great communicators, messaging, and so on. Well, she is crushing it out there in Michigan. Big things in her future, I think, for sure. Very happy to have her back here on the show. And now I want to get to my second guest here on the program. This audience is special. We have built a community together of amazing, while in some ways like-minded or valued, and we certainly don't agree on everything, as has come out in many of our hangouts, though almost never at all really ugly. It's been really amazing. A lot of it because of guys like Pete Coe. Pete is a really thoughtful guy. He works in a university in California in a financial aid office. He's doing good work, important work, helping people. He's also a super talented artist. He is a voiceover actor. He is a guitarist, a musician, and he is a father and a husband out there. He lives in San Francisco. So if you're out there, look him up and say hello. Follow Pete on Twitter at Pete Coe, BOPETECOEVO. Thank him for all of his contributions to the show. And now let's get to know this guy who is a super interesting, fascinating life and extremely vulnerable, highly intelligent, thoughtful, and really kind. I love him. You love him. Ladies and gentlemen, a listener spotlight, a deep dive into it's time to get to know Pete Coe. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, here he is. A man whose sideburns are so long and rebellious you think he might be a Confederate, but in fact, he thinks like a modern-day progressive. A man who you thought you knew, but you didn't, because he is a cancer survivor who studied anthropology, specifically primates, even more specifically chimpanzees in Costa Rica. Oh, and he lived in Taiwan for 2 years. Lots to learn about our friend Pete Coe. Welcome to the Stand Up listener and announcer profile, I think.
Hey there.
Hey now.
As I clear my throat, as listeners throw their phones away in anger, the temerity of Pete Dominic having me on as a guest. My word.
Are you nervous for this profile?
No, yeah, but that's cool.
Yeah,
I can hide it. I can fight through it.
Okay. All right. Well, we're really happy to.
Chimpanzees don't live in Costa Rica, by the way.
What did I get wrong there?
I studied chimpanzees in captivity locally, not in Costa Rica.
Oh, you studied.
We'll talk about that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we could just real quick. You studied monkeys in a certain type of monkey in Costa Rica.
Howler monkeys.
Yes. Okay.
Howler monkeys in Costa Rica.
Yes. That you are a freaking fascinating person for so many reasons, which is why I wanted to talk to you. I love getting to know listeners myself, but it's a weird thing to do alone. It's like, why am I the only person that gets to learn of the talent and fascinating life this person has lived and frankly, what they have to offer the rest of us? And you have offered more than anybody because you've been a contributor daily for a long time. And so I, of course, want to thank you again publicly for that and so much more. But I also wanted to ask you to start, like, how did you find the show? And, kind of how long have you been listening?
Well, I've been listening to you since the SiriusXM merger, and you went on the POTUS channel. And, I was an XM subscriber before it became SiriusXM. So you were doing your thing on Sirius with the Pete's Big Mouth, and then when the merger happened and you switched over to POTUS, that's when you came on, and it was the afternoon. And I have a very distinct memory of that and going like, who's that? I haven't heard this person before. That sounds kind of interesting. And so from then on, and that was a while, good 14 years ago now. So it's before my son was born. And, so we just became part of the routine, just have you on in the afternoon. I was only working part-time at that moment in my life, so I can be around to listen to it. And so when you had the SiriusXM flame out and that moment when you kind of had to say sayonara to everyone, I kind of said, man, that sucks. I should reach out to this person. So I did that, and you very kindly sent me a I gave you my phone number, but then you texted me a photo of yourself, which was a little inappropriate, but oh,
that's right. I sent you a picture of my dick, right away after you said that really thoughtful thing to me. I just was like, hey man, thank you so much for your concern and your support. Here's a dick pic.
Was that you? Was that your dick?
Yeah. I did that with a lot of people. I'm surprised no one ever mentions it. No, what do you mean? I sent you a picture of what? Like, what did I? No,
you just sent. I think it was just to show that it was your phone number, so you sent a picture of your face. So, yeah. You were in your sexy jogging wear, but anyway, you sent me a text, said let's talk, and so we talked that afternoon over the phone, and you were you were very, very nice, and I always appreciated about you and the show was the inclusivity factor, and the fact that and me being somebody who's not particularly impressed with celebrity at all, found that really fascinating and cool that you were willing to do that and take time out of your day to reach out to a listener who expressed some concern about you. So we just chatted infrequently since then. And then I started saying, hey, if you're looking for somebody to contribute some music to your show, I can write this silly song about, a chimpanzee killing somebody. And then, it's sort of like, it became music. And then I began training in voiceover, and John Carroll, the longtime listener, stand-up theme writer, sent you sort of a mock introduction at one point, and said, it was like this sort of, and he did all the sound design on it, so he had applause and all this other stuff, and it fit in with some of the things you were trying at the beginning of the show at that time. And I said, well, wait a minute, I could do that. And so I said, well, what do you think of this? And I said, and I had sort of a format of an announcement that kind of became the important questions that I ask at the beginning of the show. So, and the important questions are never important and always totally ridiculous. So that was the whole point of that.
Wow. It's like behind the music on this show and the evolution of our friendship, relationship, and the bit, the stuff the work you've been doing, the writing and performing and recording and then sending it to me. Tremendous amount of work that you've been doing for the show. It's really fascinating to hear all of that. You mentioned John Carroll, and you've also collaborated with Dan McDonald, and a lot of other people have sent you over the past year or so ideas to record, which has been great. You've also joined us many times at our hangouts. And so my question is, it's great that I love to hear about how you found the show and remind me about our evolution. But I feel like you're a uniquely interesting person to to ask, how has the show affected you, or how, more importantly, has the community of people that you've gotten to know, and they've certainly all gotten to know you every day, how have they affected you? Like, how do people reach out privately, and who have you gotten to know? And maybe share one or two if you want.
I mean,
overall, what does it feel like to be Pete Coe now? You're a big deal. You're a celebrity now. What's it feel like? Paparazzi?
Yeah, I'm fending off the, I mean, let's just say David Hasselhoff is very jealous of
I feel like there's a lot of ferocious animals, that want to attack you based on your work here.
Right. Well, because I badmouth them a lot.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think what the show means, well, I touched on what it means for me sort of professionally and creatively, right? Because I'm contributing to the show, and so it allowed me sort of an outlet, right? And which, by the way, and I joke about this a lot, the lack of vetting on your end for the things that I contribute is really helpful to me to contribute. You know,
I think I've given you one note over the years, and it was like you did a dick joke in the opening, and I didn't want it on that particular program because like the guest was someone like Senator Mazie Hirono. Like, I don't know if we want to open with that one day.
No, it was even more like you were talking to Biden people, and it's like, oh God, they're probably going to hear that, and I forget what the it was one of his staff people that goes on television a lot, and I think you were maybe talking to him. And,
got it. All right. Well,
yeah. Anyway, but it was that didn't get used, but that's fine. I was totally happy to change it and make it about animal zoonotic diseases instead.
Most likely, that's where you went. It's one of your.
Yeah, I've over the time that I've been contributing, I've collaborated with other people with similar talents. So people, obviously musicians, and I got to meet Phil Round when he was out here, listener Phil Round in Wyoming, who reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm going to be vacationing out there at some point, so let's connect." And hung out with him and his lovely wife, had a great time.
That's awesome.
He's and we ran into a music store owner that we frequent, so it's good to.
Well, he's also. Did you just mention that he's a talented musician? You are as well, and music brings people together, especially I'm guessing when it's a similar genre or instrument or something. I don't know if you guys as rock and roll guitarists or guitarists in general, if you meet a flautist and you're like, let's talk about our similarities in music because it's such a different instrument or something or genre. But generally speaking, music brings people together. Certainly here on the show, right? There's a ton of
correct
musicians. Maybe they're just as everywhere in every community.
John Carroll actually reached out to me one time, which that's actually, I mean, a musician of his stature reaching out to me was a big deal for me. So that was a real treat to be able to talk to him on the phone, and the fact that he would take time out of his day to reach out to, Mr. Animal Killing Guy Jingle was pretty cool. So, but I mean, the community means the kind of connection that I have, and not just with other musicians, just with other people, and being able to just sort of share my comedy and my creativity with the listenership. I mean, that's really the main thing I get out of it. And I'm very blessed, obviously, that I have you to thank for allowing me to spread my nonsense.
Well, we love your nonsense. And speaking of it, just one more question on it. I think you have this Christopher Walken quality where it's almost doesn't matter as much about the content. It's the delivery is so original, unique, and I don't know, almost character driven in his case, that you can almost say anything, and the way that you hold it and the way that you deliver it, it's funny. It's like, I went to the store to get paper towels, and you're like,
Scooper.
What is it?
Pooper scooper.
Yes. Well, I
can say a funny word like chlamydia.
Yes. You make STDs funny about you should be a doctor who delivers the news that someone has. Go ahead and tell me right now. Let's improv one. You've just walked back in the room, Dr. Coe. What is it?
Pete, I've just done an inspection, and it looks like you have a venereal disease called herpes.
Oh, that pause really was brutal. Wasn't sure what it was going to be. So, well, we love it. We love it. We love you, and everybody loves you. And I hear so many great things about you. So let's learn a little bit about who this guy is. I think I've learned a lot about you and been talking to you, of course, for a while. And so when we talked today before I hit record, it was fascinating to learn even more. We were born the same year, 1975, so I won't tell the people how old we are, but I grew up in New York State, and you grew up in California State, specifically in Sacramento in the 80s, and you lived in, like, your parents are public sector workers, and you live in, I guess, the burbs, and around apparently a lot of Mormons. Tell me about your childhood there in Sacramento in the 80s.
Correct. I am from our ever-exciting state capital here in California.
Yeah.
And my parents were public sector workers. Like, a lot of the economy there is driven by public sector and public sector workers, state workers. My brother, who's 3 years younger, he's a state worker now, actually.
Your mom was a special ed teacher, a public school teacher. Your dad, what was his work?
He worked for the Army Corps of Engineers, so he was in the Army during the Vietnam War, and then he became a civilian employee for the Army Corps of Engineers. So he was a career Department of the Army servant. And so he, it being the state capital of California, there were a lot of federal buildings downtown as well as state government buildings. So he worked in one of those, and he did wetland mitigation. So he was kind of an environmental regulatory guy. So that's what he did. And I mean, my childhood was not dissimilar from other people growing up in the suburbs at that time. There was a lot of empty lots, and until they became like crappy apartment buildings, and the property manager would chase you out of them because you can't ride your bike in the parking lot, apparently.
Right. Yeah, we had something similar, but it was like contemporary homes in my kind of rural-ish. It was like new homes, and they were empty lots, and then we would do the same thing. We'd ride our bike. We built dirt tracks and ramps and shit on those lots, and we stole their lumber and built a half pipe. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's real similar. And I was kind of a sensitive kid, so I didn't have too many friends. But growing up, but I also kind of discovered music at an early age, and part of that was just being kind of wanting people to like me in a way. So I would kind of perform, and I would get a lot of music stuck in my head because I would listen to the radio a lot, so a lot of top 40, and then I would watch a lot of television. So it was a lot of this was back in the day when all the shows had a theme song. So you could kind of see where the news dump jingles come in. It's like I had all these things rolling around in my head all the time. It's like, oh yeah, I would be sitting in the cafeteria. I remember sitting in the cafeteria and when I was a kid, and I'd be sitting there, and suddenly it would enter my head the Facts of Life theme song. It's like, take a good, did the bed. I mean, it would just be constant. I'm like, God, I got to think of something else. This is just ridiculous.
Why is that when girls would start flocking over when you would start to sing the theme song of the Facts of Life? They'd be like, oh.
Strangely enough, it was the exact opposite.
Oh.
Yeah. So I wanted to do that, but I didn't. I was also, I had a lot of confidence issues with lacking confidence. And so there was, I wanted to perform in some way and create and share in some fashion, but I was kind of channeled toward music. And so I started playing clarinet when I was in 4th grade. And then in 5th, 6th, 7th grade, I played alto saxophone. And this was back in the day when, they actually had money to fund school bands, and you could get a cheap music horn rental pretty easily. And so I learned to read music that way, and that's what I did. And I played music, and I did, I tried to do sports, but I was, there were always people who were bigger and stronger and faster than me. So that didn't really pan out. So,
it's so weird that like our society doesn't really have as much of a place for the artist as it does the athlete, and just issues around conforming to that. And even if you, like me, I tried to assimilate, I tried to conform, I tried to be the best athlete I could. I practiced hard, but I was so small. And so I could never really compete, but I tried, and I was good enough that I was in that circle of jocks, but also an artist too, like you. And it's like, you talked about being a kind of a malcontent and socially awkward and disruptive. And we talked a little bit about how you got diagnosed with like PTSD from high school or from, growing up. And it just seems like it's all society driven. Like, as I've gotten to know you, I've gotten to know you as an adult, as a father, as a talented, creative guy. And it just sucks that childhood does that, and you're just so not alone. And I wonder how you look at what's wrong with our society even today, raising your son, he's a musician. What do you think needs to change so that people don't have to deal with that shit just because they're creative and they're not awesome at sports?
Well, I think it's important to put your kid in an environment that fosters that the caring and inclusive environment that needs to happen for creativity to take place, right? And being very open and non-judgmental is not really a character trait that was taught in school back when we were in, elementary and high school. It was not a thing. Nowadays it's more of a thing, right? You go to, they're constantly talking about the just sort of the social, emotional well-being of children now. And it's more of, it's more at the forefront of what teachers are doing in their curriculum. I went to graduate school for educational administration, and they talked a lot about how inclusivity and social justice factor into the social and emotional well-being of children.
How could they not? How could they not? Well, if you're one of the few brown or black kids, maybe you just moved to this country, God forbid. If you are you're not sure how you identify, because that's the other thing we always forget when we're talking about young kids. Like, well, he identifies. A lot of they're confused. They don't know, and that's what we need to maybe embrace. But whatever it is, if you don't have whatever it's, tell me why that's specifically important. You're the one with the master's in it. Because people are fighting against that now. In my board, they're anti learning about diversity.
No, it's because of the way that we were brought up to sort of like this sort of every man for himself Darwinian theory of like of raising kids, and it's like you gotta be tough and you gotta do this and that. If you're a man, you gotta do this, and if you're a woman, then, if you're a girl, then, shut up, you're a girl, go have kids or whatever. And that was, and a lot of that is religious driven. Sacramento is a very religious town. And so, I don't mean to disparage religion at all, but it's true. A lot of it comes from that. And I think with sort of these new equity and social justice initiatives in education now, it doesn't even need to be like named, because when you're focusing on the social and cultural element of the kid, and you're trying to, you're realizing that growth and becoming a confident person and being able to communicate that confidence and being able to communicate effectively is part of what people want to see in an educated person now. You don't even really need to, the social inequity issues sort of come along with that, right? Because you're talking about, you're connecting with the child and you're giving them space to be themselves and to be sort of explore who they are, right? The kids are exploring who they are. They're trying to figure stuff out. You back up and you give them space, and you be very open and non-judgmental with them. And that's what we tried to do I try to do that with my professional career, working in the public sector, working at a university, in financial aid that I have for many years. That's public policy. You work in financial aid, you're dealing with a lot of vulnerable student populations.
Yeah, you must deal with so many different types of vulnerable student populations, but just personalities that come with them.
Yeah, they come in. I remember this one woman popped her head into my office one time. It was a shared office with two other people. I was working at the community college, and she opens the door and she says, "Hi, I just got out of prison. Can you help me?" And I was like, okay. I brought her in and I kind of said, okay, so, and I got her information and then I sat her down and then I sort of I gave her a process and set her on her way. But people in those situations, they're desperate. They've been bounced around to other, all kinds of different like social services offices and things like that. And, probably went through a lot of the same things I did when I was a kid, and they didn't have any bootstraps to pull themselves up by. So,
yeah, absolutely. You must always have to meet people where they're at. I guess you learn that every day in your job. So you mentioned also just along these lines, I thought it was really interesting how you talked about, and I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, just high school for you and how you were bullied and how you figured out, I think on your own to some extent, maybe with some therapy or probably on your own journey, that it created trust issues for you. And it's interesting to just think about, equity initiatives and diversity initiatives and think about the people who are the minority somehow, some way, or historically discriminated against, marginalized. But you were a white kid who was weird. You were into music. You looked like this. You maybe behaved like this. You have who knows what it is, but it puts you somehow outside the circle. And that created a lot of problems for you. I mean, kids were pushing you around and just being dicks. And what does that do to the rest of your life? You talked so honestly and vulnerably about that. And I thought it would really allow a lot of other people to be seen if you wanted to just talk a little bit about it.
Well, it hurt also. It impacted me probably more so than others because of my sort of hypersensitive personality.
Sure.
And I don't mean hypersensitive in a bad way. That's just I just happen to be more sensitive than other people. And so the jostling and back in those days when it wasn't okay to be that kind of meek, hypersensitive person, you made yourself an easy target to kids who had a lot of anger issues, and those anger issues would oftentimes manifest themselves into violence and physical violence and pushing and shoving and punching and all the rest of it. So it impacted me very negatively in my adult life. It took me a long time to really kind of gain the confidence to be able to create and share openly with people, and contributed to a lot of stage fright issues, when I would try to play music live. So there was a lot of hardship involved with that. But I also, I made a lot of good friends in high school, at least, that were sort of on a similar journey that I was, that found me interesting because I was kind of funny and I had, and I used my humor and my music, experience to sort of like form a band with my brother, and who was 3 years younger. My brother was a drummer, so once I was a senior in high school and he was a freshman at the same high school, it was really easy to sort of, after school, we go home and play in his bedroom, and then I would invite other friends to come in and play music. And we were not amazing, but it was like very cathartic. And, there was other things that went with having a band and shipping around equipment, getting gigs, talking to people, promoting your band. It's all these things that go along with it that really helped my confidence a lot. Just being able to, and then I would have mentors, people who were older than me that, have went through that and liked the music and wanted to help. so yeah, there was a nice little punk rock, heavy metal music scene that was in Sacramento at that time. And I mean, none of the bands were great, but we all played shows together, and our friends would come out, and friends, people that knew of us. And
sure,
I remember we played our first show, and as our band, I remember people coming out who I would never think would be curious or interested in what I was doing outside of high school or what, or anything like that. And they were coming up to me in like gym class and going like, "Oh man, you guys are great." And just, I was like, "Really? Wow. Like you were totally mean to me just the other day."
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And so, so I think that I feel like there would be trust issues with people in terms of, thinking that they were maliciously trying to give me a compliment when they were really just being assholes. And so trust issues would develop along those lines. I would have knee-jerk reactions to people who would be encouraging me. And when they would do it seriously, there would still be that knee-jerk reaction, right? Because those trust issues kind of festered over time.
Hey, great job, Pico. Fuck you.
Yeah, I would be like, fuck you.
Yeah,
shut up.
Yeah. Yeah,
so,
it sucks.
That kind of thing. And so, but when they started complimenting me on things I was doing outside of high school, then it was kind of like, oh, they're actually like, I know that they're being serious, because why would they do that? So slowly but surely, that kind of led me to sort of just gain the self-confidence to be able to overcome the sort of inferiority complex.
Yeah, music can do that, and performing live obviously can do that. But it's also just so many people have a similar story just about how their art, and probably more specifically music, created that identity for them, because school doesn't sponsor that, it doesn't promote it, and maybe society's hierarchy doesn't. It's a weird thing too, right? Like the theater kids are the weirdos and the nerds in high school, and then when all those popular kids are in their 20s, they're all reading about those people as celebrities, because they're now talented actors and famous celebrities now. Those same kids that were theater nerds are now somehow respected. Anyway.
Yeah. Jessica Chastain was that person in our high school.
Oh, really? So, you went to high school with her?
Yep.
She was
2 years. She's 2 years younger than me, but yeah.
She was kind of considered like a weird theater kid, and now she's a super talented, successful, beautiful actress.
Now she's like big time, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember my brother coming in and saying like, "Yeah, Jessica Chastain's big time now," and I was kind of like, "Oh, really?" And this was like 10 years ago or so, and he said, "Yeah, she's lying about her age, because she's actually 2 years older than me, but she says that she's my age," and I'm like, so
good for her.
I don't know.
Good for her. So, you went to college. I mean, there's so much more I could talk about that, but I think that a lot of people can relate. I was going to say just to the point about music and discovering that. Obviously, that was such an important thing for you. And you mentioned that you've connected with other musicians that listen to the show, part of our community. But so you then go to college you were like me, like school wasn't really your thing in terms of just testing and all of the how you learn that way. Also, if it's something that you're not that interested in, it's really hard to even pay attention. And that was so much, it sounds like, for you, and certainly was for me. But you go to college, you decide to study anthropology, and then even more specifically to focus on primates and their behavior. And that leads you to Costa Rica, where you study monkeys, the social behavior of primates. Who would have known this about Pete Coe? Unless you were really listening to those jingles real closely and you picked something up. Wow, why? How did you get into?
Little did anyone know that the rampaging chimpanzee in the song is actually a personal tale. Yeah, no, yeah. So I mean, let's be clear. I went to community college for 3 years before I was able to convince like somebody to allow me to transfer to get my degree. So, but yeah, in community college, I discovered, I decided on a major, that I wanted, and I was I was not a good student per se until I transferred to the 4-year level, and there was that sort of click thing that happens, like, oh, I just have to write this essay and regurgitate everything the professor tells me, and then I'll get an A in this class. Yeah. Kind of like, is that all it takes to get an A? Wow. So so that was when I actually became an okay student. But before that, I was like, C's and D's. I wasn't really, I wasn't what you would call the professor's favorite at community college, but it did open the doors to me in terms of education and what that meant as sort of an expression of rebellion. And, we talked about this before, but I just, I have kind of a rebellious, like, anti-authoritarian streak in me. And, the education really brought that to the fore, because I realized that it's like, oh, I can actually sort of like learn this stuff, and that is actually like suited to my nature. Yeah. So, and community college, there's all kinds of things you could take there. It's like, wow, I could take studio music class. They have that. Like, that's a class. Like, sweet, and I would get into that class. So I took a bunch of music. I took geography for the first time, and geography professor was really, really inspiring for me to, his name was Robert Christofferson, and he wrote the textbook Geosystems, which is still used in the Western world at universities far and wide.
But you were saying, this guy made a huge impact on you and taught you to question things like corporate interests and government interests and the public's interest and history. And also, I think you told me that he also led you to begin to think about, and I think you said 1993, the climate crisis, when a lot of smart people were talking about it. Is this the same guy?
Yep.
Yeah.
He was where his class in 1993 was the first place that I learned about climate change and learned about global warming that was happening. I mean, at this point, Al Gore had written about it, several years prior, and there was those hearings during the 80s and stuff. But I was too young at that time to pay attention to that. But
you were also doing a lot of littering at that time, is my understanding.
Right. And I wasn't going to share this, but there was a lot of defecating in public.
Right. You did that, and that contributed, by the way, to some of what we talked about earlier, you being socially awkward. A lot of people would be, there goes Pete Coe. He shit at a stop sign yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, people don't realize that that's where the news dump comes from.
That's right. That's right. So we were digressing, though, about your interest in a higher intellectual subject about the climate crisis, and more important, I guess, the how indelible this specific professor was on you and what it taught you about where you wanted to go and what direction with your life, at least in terms of how you wanted to think about the world, it sounds like.
He was the one who kind of spurred the rebellious nature in me when he said one time, and I'll never forget it, after sort of describing all of these things about climate change, and he said they, as in like the corporations and people, he was describing like corporations like Exxon sending people out to give talks at universities, anti-climate talks and things like that. And he said, they don't want you to know this stuff. They want you down the street eating their McDonald's and smoking their cigarettes. They don't want you knowing. And so then I was like, oh, right. That made the connection between like rebelling against the man, which I kind of wanted, which I felt good about doing, and knowledge, educating yourself, learning about history, learning about other cultures, learning about, and so that was sort of the journey, my start of my journey through, I'll never forget him saying that, because it stuck with me all through my just taking college and exploring all these different subjects. And eventually I landed on anthropology, and I had the opportunity to take a field course in Costa Rica. And there I studied primates in their natural habitat. So I looked at howler monkeys all day. I would get up at like 6 a.m. and go out with other students. And, there was a lot of funny things that happened. At one point, we were invaded by a flood of army ants in our cabin, which spawned us to all. It was me and 2 other guys. We grabbed our stuff and all fled in terror to the other cabin across the dirt road.
Why? What do army ants do? Forgive my ignorance.
I mean, they're if you've seen nature shows where army ants sort of like they move in a collective front, and that gives them collective strength, right, to overcome prey or carcasses or larger prey or carcasses or things that they need to take back to the nest that is bigger than their own bodies. So, and I think, Christian O'Farah talked about carpenter ants and their role in the show. And I think, so it's important that I bring up the army ants.
Yeah, I don't want to think about it. I haven't seen one in here in 2 weeks. I don't know why. I think it's a good sign. I think they heard me talking about them and they stopped eating the shed. But yeah, I definitely have a problem. They're intimidated.
But anyway, so I did that, and that was a big. Sometimes you kind of have to do things to realize you don't want to do them, and so being out in that environment, as fun as it was, and learning about that stuff was fun as it was, I eventually kind of moved into more sociocultural anthropology when I transferred to the 4-year university, and I eventually got my bachelor's degree in cultural anthropology.
That's a really fascinating thing to learn about a person, and something I feel like you would say, like, right when meeting someone, like, yeah, I studied howler monkeys in Costa Rica, and but that leads us to your master's, and you how do you get to Taekwondo? Well, I should say you studied Taekwondo, but what I was going to ask you was about Taiwan. Why don't you tie in Taekwondo and Taiwan? And I wasn't being some kind of insensitive about Asian cultural things. I meant to say Taiwan. You lived in Taiwan. You taught English there for 2 years. You also studied Taekwondo. Go ahead, Pete.
So when I was working throughout high school and community college. I worked at various pizza places, and one of the pizza places I worked at was next to a Taekwondo school.
Aren't they always next to each other?
Right, because who else wants to go in and eat a bunch of pizza than Taekwondo students?
I don't know. They just seem like strip mall businesses. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, correct. You are correct, sir. And so I started doing that sort of got me into martial arts, but he was also a teacher who taught meditation. And so that was the first place I learned about meditating and sort of the spiritual side of martial arts, which I found very interesting.
Sure.
And that gave me a lot of, as far as songwriting goes, that gave me a lot more that gave me a little bit more interesting material, I think, than, just like, yelling in key at the government or whatever. And but after I graduated from Santa Cruz, I took a year of Mandarin Chinese there because I had it in my mind that I was going to study ethnography, which is sort of, it's this field of anthropology where you go and sort of embed yourself in amongst that culture, and you write about it as sort of an outsider.
Yeah, I've interviewed a few, and they're fascinating. The field of study is fascinating, but so is anybody who goes and does that kind of work. So what happened there with that?
So my Chinese teacher said there was there was an economic crisis going on in Asia at that time. Mm-hmm. This was 1997, 98. But he said that Taiwan actually had a lot of work for foreigners like me who were native English speakers, because there was this push to learn English, especially in the schools and, after school programs that they had. And I had, through a mutual friend, through my best friend in high school, he was friends with a girl who went to another high school that he had grown up with, and she got me a job in Taiwan teaching English as a second language to kids from like kindergarten through, elementary school age, roughly kindergarten through 6th grade or so. And so I did that I moved there, and her family was very, very kind to me and gave me a place to stay when I didn't have one. And I was able to do that off and on for the next 2 years and practice my Chinese. Obviously, the Mandarin is sort of the general language that people speak. The cool kids all speak Taiwanese. So I wasn't one of those cool kids, but
I have a billion questions about that time period, but let me just ask one. Did you go there alone, and does that give a guy like you or anybody an opportunity to reinvent yourself? Whoever you were in high school, you go to college where maybe nobody knows you, hopefully, and you can be like, oh yeah, you can call me PJ now, even though my name's Pete. You get to reinvent yourself entirely, and you especially get to do that, I'm guessing, if you move across the planet and live in a very foreign country with a foreign language. Who's Pete Coe in Taiwan? What did you learn there about yourself and about the world?
Well, I mean, I think the main thing that it did was it increased my cultural competency as sort of a white straight man from the suburbs. If you put somebody in the place to have the experience of being an only when they've never been an only, and I was really an only in Taiwan. And I mean, there were other foreign teachers.
I was an only in puberty, but I don't want to talk about me. It was late. Yeah. Took a long time. Only one. So you're the only white guy in the building, in the town, in the American? I mean,
yeah, pretty much. I mean, I'm definitely a different person. It's 98.9% Chinese native Taiwanese there. So there are a few foreigners, but I didn't even live in, Taipei is the capital and the largest city, and that probably has the most international influence in terms of number of people born in other countries that live there. I didn't even live there. I lived in the third largest town, which is in the middle of the country. Not a lot of foreigners, but that's where I lived. And it just, when you have to struggle to kind of do everyday things, like you can't read a menu and you're kind of dependent on other people cooking for you because you don't have, I didn't have a kitchen in my apartment for the longest time. And so I couldn't really go out. It wasn't like I could just go to the grocery and get stuff and bring it back to my place and make it. I had to go out. And invariably I'd be, the lone foreigner sitting there, and eating by yourself is very weird in Taiwanese culture. So of course I would be the lone foreigner sitting there by myself eating. So, but that really helped me to have that experience and to, have sort of other people's biases about white Americans come back at me. And
sure, and it didn't help that you would sometimes sit there and pull out a guitar and put on a cowboy hat and sing country. That only perpetuates what they probably already thought about us. Why would you do that?
They are not a big fan of Willie and Waylon there.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a fact. I mean, it's a great observation to, I think most of us probably don't think about being the only, or maybe you have been for a moment at a conference or someone's gathering, something like that. Like I have been at this, black funeral or something a couple times, but living in a foreign country, being the only, and what that does is a fascinating.
It's like I was truly an only. You know what I mean? I probably felt like I was an only in high school. Like I was the only, I was the only guy. I had big hair and I was not. I was socially awkward and all that. So maybe I felt like an only then. But I didn't really feel like an only. Right. It's like, I certainly didn't feel like an only the way the one or two African Americans in our high school felt like an only. Well,
it creates the cultural competency that you're talking about. And right. I loved hearing you talk about your time there and what you learned, and certainly I'm sure it sparked a curiosity for a lot of the geopolitical issues that we talk about. But let me ask you two more big questions I want to ask you, which are, one, you were diagnosed with cancer as a young man. Tell me a little bit about, that experience and what that taught you. And then, of course, I just want to wrap by talking about your role as a dad, because you and I have shared a lot about parenting and stuff. But first, why did you get cancer? What did you do wrong? Was it?
It was a zoonotic cancer.
Oh.
No, I don't know. I was. I think. I mean, Taiwan is a place that has a lot of nuclear power, and I am thinking that it was a mutation in my blood that started, and because of something environmental that I was exposed to. That's what the doctor says.
Really?
But we don't. They don't really know what is. The cells just start dividing, and people, other people with cancer who have had cancer listening to this can know what I'm talking about. It's just like they don't have. I mean, they're developing the technology to fight it off, but they still, with blood cancer that I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, which luckily is one of the ones that they kind of have a handle on. But it still took 4 months of chemotherapy and a month of radiation treatment to be able to cure me. And so,
how old were you?
I was 23, 24.
Did you ever think you were going to die?
Oh, I was scared out of my mind.
Did anybody tell you that the odds at any point or anything?
Eventually we got there. Yeah. I mean, it was hard for me to, I mean, I was having a panic attack the second time I went to visit the oncologist. But I kind of, I think he at one point even gave me something to sort of calm me down, some kind of pill, sedative or something.
Wow.
I don't know. But, yeah. But after I had talked to him, it was sort of like, well, I mean, you're confident, right? You're confident that you're going to be, that I'm going to be fine. He's like, I'm very confident you're going to be just fine. And you're going to respond to treatment really well. You have everything going for you. I am very, very, very confident that you're going to be okay with this. And so that kind of made my brain switch over to get into problem solving mode. And that's how I've always kind of looked at health now. And it sort of changed my way of kind of looking at my health like, okay, you got a problem. Let's get into problem solving mode. What can we do? We got to do X, Y, Z. And, other friends who've had illnesses and things, and I give them that advice. They hate me because I come in, because I don't really, I kind of make them forget about the emotional side of it and to sort of get through it. But then after your body has been put through this whole treatment regimen and everything, then the emotional part hit me. And so yeah, I had a lot of sort of depression and anxiety after that whole period where I was, really having to come to terms with who I was as a musician. I was somebody, I had met my wife at that point, and I met her through Craigslist, not in the way that most people meet their wives through Craigslist, but in a way that she was looking for musicians to play with. So I had already been playing music with them, and I said, hey, look, guys, I got this thing. I gotta, I may not be able to come to rehearsal all the time. And so as time went on and I went through it, I kind of had that sort of band, sort of like musical group, sort of collective to kind of come back on and help me through the emotional ramifications of dealing with treatment. And there's all kinds of questions you have when you undergo this kind of thing. It's like, am I ever going to have kids again?
Right, because it's this invasive, you're poisoning your body to kill the cancer cells, and what is that going to do the rest of your body, the rest of your life kind of thing? Yeah,
and it affects my, and that kind of brings back the inferiority complex that I had with, as is a girl ever going to like me? You know, am I damaged goods? That question crossed my mind several times, and you know, things like that. So
yeah, for sure. I have a billion jokes to make. I think it was the clarinet was more of a concern, but you know, who am I to judge?
Well, yeah.
I mean, kind of guy who plays a clarinet.
Benny Goodman was not considered a sex symbol in 1983.
Fair enough. I could never have referenced a clarinetist. That's crazy, and I really appreciate you sharing. You know, you're going to be the guy I go to when I get really sick, for sure, because I want you to make up the plan. But that's a really thoughtful outcomes, and also just you know how it affected you is interesting and it's probably so important to this day. Last thing I want to ask you is about your role as a dad. Your son, do we want to say his name? Do we want to give him any
Theo. My son's name is Theo. He's 13.
He's 13 years old. And what has he meant to you? What kind of dad, what kind of role is responsibility as being dad meant?
Well, it's the best thing that ever happened to me, becoming a dad and having a son. And, you know, I think that you just learn so much more about yourself when you're a parent, and, you know, all of your issues and all of your hangups sort of come to the fore as a parent. And so I learn so much about myself. Like, he teaches me so much about myself. And when you have another sort of very impressionable child in the house, sort of like giving the same kind of hard time back to me that I give to him at times. You know, you learn about yourself. You learn how to sort of relate. You can relate to people better. You know, you learn how to be even more open and non-judgmental with people. And so, yeah, I love being his dad. It's the greatest thing ever.
Well, I'm sure he loves being your kid, and
he plays music too. So we have that in
right.
common.
He plays drums and you play guitar and you play music. It's great that's you have that to do together. And he also plays with his friends and sounds like a cool cat, Theo. Yeah.
He's already way cooler than me, but I always remind him that's not
Bar's
really
low. Bar's really low.
Right.
Pete, the bar is very high and everybody loves you and I love you and I appreciate that you're in my life and I appreciate you sharing so much with us today. And I'm sure people will reach out and want to talk to you and most likely, you know, connect whenever we do these. That's usually what happens. People had similar experiences or just feel like, oh my gosh, that guy's like me. So hopefully the friend group only goes larger and the trust only grows greater and certainly has for me. Thank you so much for what you do. I cannot wait every day to hear your now intros and whatever else we come up with news jingles or whatever else we do. I hope that you'll be a part of us for till the end. Till the end.
I am so blessed to be a part of this show and be associated with you and this community that you built. So thank you, Peter.
And in the next intro, if you could work in that the shed is, you know, solar powered. I like to get that propaganda in. And also, I thought this would be good material. I have a lot of Crocs and a lot of, you know, people have a love-hate with Crocs, but I have all the kinds, the clamshelled ones that people hate, which I think are ugly, but the most comfortable thing I put on my foot and functional, and the rest of them, the whole line, I've got it. So if you can work that in, great. If you can't, I'll give you anything else you need.
You know, I can work.
I don't want to tell you how to do your job.
I will mention the stiletto heeled Crocs that
I didn't say.
I think Tina Winsett put that on the Discord.
I didn't say I had any stiletto heeled Crocs. I think that would defeat the purpose of the Croc, but also defeat the purpose of improv, which I just broke. Pete, thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete.
All right, we're recording here again at the end because you feel bad that you didn't give a shout out to who?
I want to give a shout out to Gareth Sever too.
Yeah,
because he's reached out to me several times and been very complimentary to my my role on the show, and he is, you know, just also being sort of a touring performer and being a kind of a kindred spirit. I've really enjoyed our conversations and work and collaborating on jingles and things that ideas that he's had. He's very similar to me in that he's got a jingle in his head, and he's just like, oh my God, I got to get it out. I got to share it. So it's the same thing with me. So.
All right. Well, there you go, Gareth. I'm glad that you mentioned that. He is indeed another super talented, awesome guy, and someone I'm also going to talk to for the show, too, because he's a really very, very good guy, very moral, very thoughtful. So, yeah. All right, there you go. That is it for Pete Coe's feature, deep dive into getting to know Pete Coe. I hope you liked that. I'm sure we'll get to know a lot more about him. If you want to get to know Pete, he often hangs out with us on our Thursday night hangouts, which is tomorrow night, and you can check him out in San Francisco. He'd be happy to have a coffee with you or a drink or whatever, as he had with Phil Round, as he mentioned. A great guy, and now you've got a friend in San Francisco. Thank you so much, Pete. I really enjoyed both our little pre-interview and our conversation that we taped. I hope everybody else did too. Let them know at PeteCoVO on the Twitters. All right, that's it. That's all I've got for you. Our other regular contributor is John Carroll, singer-songwriter, founding member of the Starland Vocal Man Band, and go buy this song. Go buy it for $3 if you haven't already at johncarroll.org. Take us out, Johnny. Talk to you tomorrow, folks. Be the change you want to see in the world. Love you.
Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Oh, got to stand.